right, welcome to this episode of the Land in the Bible podcast. And we talked last week about Capernaum and some things going on there. We ended on a positive note.
The whole town was cursed.
Yeah, that was good ending. And today we're picking up with a part two there. So
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what we're getting into today.
Well, we're basically just going to roll the clock forward, or roll the page forward, I guess. Flip the page, you could say, from Luke 4 to Luke 5. We're not going that far in the text. We're just going to go just one chapter over. And we're going to look at least one person who did get it right. One person who did, accept Jesus as our Lord and come to follow him and to be successful and all that. So we're gonna see the difference. You have the masses of people in Capernaum who enjoyed the fringe benefits of being around Jesus, but never really accepted him as their personal Lord and Savior, and are cursed at the end of it all. But there are some people who did, and so of course, for me personally, I'd like to be in the better group. So we're gonna look at Peter and his path, his trajectory from being a loudmouth, jerk face guy to being, who he later became. So that's kind of today's
Gotcha.
short, sweet summary.
Cool. Well, let's kick it off. Where are we beginning? What's our land? What's our location?
Well, so what I'd like to do is, first off, if you want to talk about Peter becoming a disciple, it is a little bit complex in the Bible. Okay. So if you look at, there are sort of at least seemingly contradictory statements in John, Matthew, and Luke regarding how Peter came to be a follower.
Okay.
And it kind of goes down like this. So in John 1, it says, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard John and followed him. He first found his own brother Simon and told him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated the Christ. And he brought Simon to Jesus. And when Jesus saw him, he said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. So there's this event that John records in which they're all hanging out at sort of a John the Baptist event. And, Andrew is an early adopter and one of the first people to realize Jesus is the Messiah. I should want to try to go follow him. And he goes and gets his brother Peter, brings him to Jesus, and then Jesus makes this statement, you're going to be a rock, you're going to be Peter. And so that's what John tells us. So they're probably somewhere around Jericho, farther south of Israel, John the Baptist thing, and that's how they kind of met each other. And that's really all John gives us. When you look at Matthew 4 gives us a very, very different account, okay? Matthew 4 has Jesus freshly moved from Nazareth down to Capernaum. And it says, as he was walking along the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew. And they were casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. "Follow me," he told them, "and I'll make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. It wasn't the same story at all. And to make matters worse, Luke gives us a totally different story than that. And so we're left trying to figure out what is the truth of this matter. Mm-hmm. Is our text reliable? Does it make sense? Is there a contradiction here? Is there what's going on? And what I would actually argue is that this is all a process, and John, Matthew, and Luke are giving us a window on different parts of it. So what I think happened, what I believe happened, is that John records for us how Jesus met Andrew and Peter, that they were at, again, a John the Baptist thing, and, participating and seeing his ministry, what was going on there. John the Baptist makes a pronouncement over Jesus, this is the Messiah. Andrew hears about it, gets his brother, goes to meet him, and that's how they met. I think Matthew is giving us a very, very brief synopsis of a process Okay, that Jesus, having met them, earlier, as recorded by John, then sees them along the seashore and says, you should come follow me. And at some point in that process of him inviting them, they accepted. And then what I think Luke does is Luke zeroes in on the last bit of that process. Okay, so I don't think there's anything inherently contradictory. I don't think any one of those three stories excludes the other one. I think that they're just each giving us a window into something they know or a little something that they've seen. I think it's kind of how that goes down. Luke 5, to me, it's clear also because you look at Luke 5, and in Luke 5, Peter becomes a disciple. But in Luke 4, Jesus goes to his house. So why would Jesus go to his house if they didn't know each other at all? So it makes sense to me that, in accordance with what John tells us, they had met, and according to with what Matthew tells us, that Jesus had maybe seen him along the lake and said, you should come follow me, but that this is kind of how that deal gets finalized. I think that's kind of how it goes down.
Gotcha.
So anyway, let's look at what happened in Matthew 5. So we already set up Matthew 4. We talked about how Jesus spoke in the synagogue, and he spoke with authority, and he astonished the crowd, and he cast out demons. And that caused people to go out from there and to talk about him. And that later that same night, he goes to Peter's house and he heals Peter's mother-in-law. And then people from all over the town would kind of come in, and that the main thing they wanted to do was to hear Jesus teaching and to receive his healing. And there was this whole swirl of events all around Jesus, and that is sort of encapsulated. We get a window into one day in the life in Luke 4. And we also know, according to Matthew 4, that Jesus lived in Capernaum and that there were lots of days like that. Okay, that we don't know about all of them. But this is growing. And I think that Luke 5 is probably just a day or two after. Okay, it follows directly on the heels, I think, of what happened in Luke 4.
Gotcha.
And it goes down like this. So Jesus is now, it's a day or two later, I think, and he's out trying to teach, but now there's so many people because the word has gotten out. We heard this guy teach. He cast out a demon. He was healing people in the afternoon. He's awesome. You should come here. And they've gone out to all the surrounding villages, to places like Bethsaida and Chorazin and places like that. And people are now pouring in and they want to hear him. And it said, as the crowd was pressing in on Jesus to hear God's word, he was standing by Lake Gennesaret. Now, we also mentioned in the previous episode that whatever lake it mentions, it's all the Sea of Galilee, okay?
Now, why do they call it Lake Gennesaret?
There are different names that reference different things. The most common Hebrew name for it is Kinneret, which is the Hebrew word for a harp because of its shape. I actually don't know the derivation of Gennesaret. Sea of Galilee just means it's the lake in the region of Galilee, which that's clearly where it is. Sometimes Tiberias. Sea of Tiberias, but that's because the city of Tiberias is on the lake.
Right.
So way to ask me the one that I actually don't know the derivation of. But yeah, good work with that. So anyway, so he's there by the lake, and he wants to teach, and the crowd's pushing in, like physically pushing in on him, and he can't get enough space to talk and to be heard because there's lots and lots and lots of people, hundreds, maybe even thousands, and he can't get any space to speak. And Jesus is a smart person, so he figures out a solution. And it says he was standing by Lake Gennesaret. He saw two boats at the edge of the lake. The fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats which belonged to Simon and asked him to put out a little from the land. Then he sat down and was teaching the crowd from the boat. Now, this is cool to me because to me, there are two highlights, spiritual highlights. There are other places that maybe are more beautiful in some ways, but not really. I don't think so. But as far as these spiritual highlights of sort of the Holy Land tour, to me, the two highlights are the Garden Tomb and Capernaum, because Capernaum is just so rich with, Jesus stuff. That is where he lived. It's where he worked. There are so many miracles and so many teachings that went down right there. that I just love it. And one of the things you can do when you go there is you kind of walk in, you can look over to your left and there's a synagogue, and straight ahead of you is where Peter's house was. But you can go over to the right and you can go down to the water. And you can get really close to where this took place. Okay, now it doesn't say, exactly, he was, 25 feet from Peter's house, take a right. It doesn't give us the exact spot along the shore there, but you can go there and see it. And there's a couple things that stand out about the shoreline, right? First off, the shoreline slopes down fairly steeply. Okay, so it is very easy to see how you could have a boat in the water and then people standing on the shore, almost like like a stadium.
Yeah.
They'd be like stacked up vertically, and a lot of people could see a boat at the same time. And sound carries nicely on the water, so it could probably be easily seen and heard from a boat. So that's kind of cool. And if you do come into Capernaum and you kind of go through, as you come in, you can take a right through a gate, down the waterfront. If you look back to the right, you'll see a place where there's a bit of a cove, where there's an inlet, or where the water kind of cuts into the land. And we can't prove where this took place, right? But in my imagination, in my mind's eye, Jesus is smart and he wants to be somewhere where a lot of people can see and hear him. So in my mind's eye, he's in one of these little sort of bays or whatever, where the shore cuts in a little bit, and he can position the boat just right, and the people can be around him and up the shore, and he can sit there on the boat and be heard. Just as also just sort of a random piece of information. In our modern culture and society, typically the students or the hearers sit and the speaker or teacher stands. They often did the opposite. And throughout the Bible, it is quite normal to hear there will be sentences like that Jesus sat and taught. Okay. It was quite normal at that time. The teacher would sit and the students would stand. Okay. So he sits in the boat and he's speaking.
Gotcha.
And that's pretty cool. And I it's one of those scenes where it'd be fun to have a time machine, right? And be able to go back and watch it, just to sort of watch the world changing as Jesus is speaking, into it. So that's going on. And then the Bible says this. It says they were by the lake. He saw two boats at the edge of the lake. The fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Now, let's get background on that, because there are some things going on here that are important and that matter in the story. And what is happening is that the fishermen on the lake fish at night. Okay, they are third shift workers. They fish nocturnally. They do this because the fish in the Sea of Galilee prefer cool. And so during the heat of the day, they will typically drop down to the bottom of the lake where it's not as hot, not as much glaring sun. And then they're harder to catch because it's a deep lake and they're far down. But at night, those fish will come up to the surface. And so the better time to fish is at night. And so the fishermen would go out at night. That becomes clear in the text later when Peter says, "We fished all night." He states it clearly. So they're third shift workers, if you would. They're blue collar guys. They've been out all night fishing. We also learned from later on in the text that they had caught nothing. Mm-hmm. So they worked a really, really hard night shift and made no money whatsoever. They are likely grumpy, irritable, financially desperate. It's like it's sort of not a great psychological, emotional thing that's going on there. And in the midst of all that, they're cleaning their nets. Now, we get some more information from the historians, the archaeologists. What we are told, what I've been told, is that net cleaning process, cleaning and drying and hanging process, could take 2 or 3 hours. Okay, that they were large nets, but that they were handmade, because there was no Bass Pro Shop or there's no Amazon to order a net from or something like that. You had to make it, you had to produce it. They were expensive. You had to repair it if it tore, and it was your money maker. Mm-hmm. And so you wanted to be very meticulously careful. There was nothing in it. They would fray it over time. You wanted to be careful that it didn't stay wet and rot. And so this was a very, very careful very meticulous process by which the nets were cared for. And so Jesus is teaching, and they're doing this process. Now, something else you have to know is that their culture was very different than ours, and that, our culture has become, thanks in no small part to media, has become, I would say, very, very short attention span, sort of an ADHD culture. Mm-hmm. We, if a video is more than 3 minutes, we're like, oh, it's just so long. I don't know if I have time for this.
I was so ahead of the curve when I was in elementary school because I had ADHD.
Yeah?
I was just so advanced.
You were anticipating where
now
things
our
were
whole
going.
Culture is this way.
You're like, I can't watch this very long. I'm going to move on. You were anticipating like TikTok and YouTube. We're like, let's make this shorter. These 30-minute shows.
It's just funny that I'm in a profession that is literally just watching TV. Like my job is to, even when I'm working, I'm watching
you
TV.
Watch it, you make it.
The episode.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, being in this industry, long form stuff is, there are people that do it, but, there's, for everyone who's successful with a long form thing, for every Joe Rogan or something,
yeah,
then there's thousands of 10-second videos, 1 minute videos.
Well, it seems like it's either one or the other. You're like, if the middle of the road stuff doesn't do as well as something long. Like people want something that's they can commit to and use as entertainment, or they want something super short that's just long enough to keep you entertained, but you don't really have to invest in. Yeah. Things that are like 5 minutes long, it's like, I don't really commit to this. Yeah. But if it's an hour long, or it's a Joe Rogan 3 hours long.
I get that, because like I'll be sitting like on my computer in the living room or something, and I'll watch some dumb video on YouTube or Facebook that I find amusing, and I'll want my wife to watch it. I'll be like, hey, Connie, come here, watch this. And she's like, how long is it? And there's a cutoff. If I can say like it's 30 seconds, like, okay. If I can say it's a minute and a half, all right. I'll try. But if it gets up to like 3-5 minutes, she's like, I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a thing that happens there, and we have become consumers of short bites, and video games have also contributed, I think, because video games are incredibly short, like stimulus response loops. Like I'm constantly doing, and then I do something and something happens and I win or I lose, and it's just like bam, 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 bam. This like
it's really interesting that is an entertainment thing, because I remember, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I think this thing's fascinating. Like whenever I'm entertaining myself watching, because obviously being in this, I just primarily watch movies and TV as entertainment. If that's a screen time entertainment, that's what I want to do. I do not want to play games on my phone. I don't want to really play video games. I'll do that for community with my kids or with other people. But to entertain myself, I'm like, I don't really want to do that. My brothers who are like, younger than me, gaming. And I'm like, that's so much work. Yeah. Like I have to engage my brain. I want to turn my brain off and like receive.
You also have to like go turn something on and set it up, and like there's a.
But for them, I think it's more of it's a different endorphin response. Like I want to like chill out and absorb something as opposed to interacting. I don't want constant back and forth.
So I have been a long-term fan of and enjoyer of the Halo series on Xbox games. So. I thought the first one was, right now we're going down a bit of a rabbit trail here, but it gets back to a real thing. Like I loved it. The first one was just revolutionary. It's like, what? We're fighting outside and there's like vehicles, the guns are cool. I got a sniper rifle. Wow. And, just love that. And I heard a developer say one time, because it's true. He said, our goal is to give you the best 30 seconds in gaming and just give it to you over and over and over and over and over again. And when you think about it, that's exactly what it is. Because like you engage somebody, you fight, somebody dies, somebody lives, then you run and get some, and then you just do it again. You do it again. You do it again. You do it again. And you sit there on a couch with 3 or 4 buddies, and you just like 6 hours later, you've had 30-second engagements, over and over and over and over again. And we've taught our minds, and we've geared our culture around that. And the culture that we're looking at here is not that at all. It's an oral culture. It's a slow culture. It's a take time culture. And so Jesus may have taught for hours. We don't know. We know from the Bible, from the book of Acts, for instance, that in one event, Paul taught so long that somebody fell asleep and went out and died, that he just literally goes out, raises the guy from the dead, and carries on. And it says till like 6 a.m. He teaches just all night. And then in the morning, he's like, okay, I've had enough. It goes to bed. But he probably taught for 8, 10, 12 hours, just go. Just go. Now, I don't think Jesus taught that long in this day, but he probably taught for 2 or 3 hours or more. Mm-hmm. Okay. So from Peter's perspective, he's worked all night. He's caught nothing. Jesus just commandeered his boat. He's doing this clean the nets, dry the nets process. About the time Jesus finishes, that process is probably about over. And Peter is thinking, now I can go home and go to bed. He's exhausted. He's tired. He's grumpy. He made no money last night. He wants to go home and go to bed. And Jesus looks at him and says, put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon knows 2 things. He knows, 1, there's no fish right now.
Right.
Heat of the day, they're all gone. The next thing he knows is, if that net gets wet,
I got to start it.
I got to go through this process again.
Yeah.
And I'm 2 or 3 more hours from going home and going to bed for nothing. Caught nothing all night. It's a bad night. This is dumb. This is a bad idea. Okay. So he has heard what Jesus asked of him, and I always imagine his response is like, well, you may be the Son of God, but I'm an expert fisherman, and I'm telling you, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
No, don't want to. And what I think is that moment is very, very applicable. That we all have moments where we know whether it's from reading the Bible, whether it's our conscience, whether it you feel like the Lord has spoken to you in some way. We all have these moments where we know, I'm supposed to do this. God's asking me to do this, and we're like, no, I don't want to do that. Please, Lord, no, I don't want to. And we are very, very much like Simon in that moment where we have our reasons. We're tired, we're worn out, we're grumpy. Maybe we know that like in a human level, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Somebody's going to go very well, whatever. And we're just like, I don't want to. I don't want to. And it could be a wide gamut of things, right? Like it could be a way that you feel like God wants you to serve. Maybe your church has been asking for some kind of volunteers, for children or parking or whatever. And you're like, I don't want to do that. Ugh, So, lead a small group or something like that. I don't want to lead a small group. I don't want to open my house up. Ugh, I don't like people. Or I don't want to eat children. I don't like children. I always joke and say I only like my own children. I don't like the other ones. My own basically listen to me. Other people's don't. I don't want to deal with them.
Yeah.
And so you feel that like, maybe the pastor is asking for help and volunteers, and you feel that thing inside of your heart that's you're kind of like, maybe I'm supposed to do this, and you're like, maybe it's more serious than that. Maybe it's like a sin issue. Like there's something that you really like doing that's really, really not good. And every time you participate in whatever it is, you just feel that conscience thing where it's like, ugh, I should be doing this. Oh man, I'm supposed to, this is bad. I'm wrong. This needs to change. Right. And you feel like, however that works, your conscience, your spirit, but you feel like God is talking to you and and you just don't want to, or it could be like like a relationship issue, like somebody has hurt you, done something wrong, and you want justice. You want God to find them and punch them right in the face. Like you want to pray one of those prayers of David, God smash their teeth and kill their children, and you don't want to let it go until that's happened. But then that the Bible talks about forgiveness and reconciliation, and that basically God forgives you as you forgive. And so you're like, I'm supposed to forgive her, but I don't like this person, and that's where you are. You're just like Peter. You know exactly what God wants you to do, and you don't want to. Okay. Now, I can only speak to my life. Okay. But in my life, I can look back and clearly see a pattern over the course of years of what I would call periods of spiritual growth, and then periods of being either plateaued or even decline, and then periods of growth, and then either plateaued or decline, and kind of going like that. And every time I hit a point of spiritual plateau or decline, it's because I was in a moment like this. Like I was in a place where I knew God wanted something from me, and I was just kind of like, no, I don't want to do that. This is a dumb example, but it's one I'm willing to share. So I remember being in college, and I have absolutely no musical skill, talent, or ability whatsoever. I can't sing, I can't play anything, but I love good music. Like I've just always, so I'm a passionate consumer of music. And, it was the 90s. It was I graduated high school in 92. So I was in college from 92 to 97. And I had a very, very base model Nissan Sentra. It had like no power steering. It was just very basic. It was a great car. It got me all over the country, and it was fast enough, stick shift, no power. It was just nothing but air conditioning and a steering wheel and a stick shift. That was all it had. But, being a dumb child of that era, I put a stereo in it that was probably worth more than the car itself, or close to. So I had this, of course, that was back during the ages of CDs.
Yeah.
And so I had probably 2 big giant books of CDs in the car with me, at all times.
So I had 50 discs.
And you had like multiple
double
of those.
them up. You'd put the front and back.
Yeah, then you get 100 in there.
Yeah.
And you could have a couple of those. And so what I did, because they give me like $15 a disc,
Did you have a changer in your trunk?
I did not.
I had a 10-disc changer in my trunk.
Ooh, that is fancy.
But in order to change it, you had to get out of the car and go to the trunk and pop the trunk.
No, I never got to the changer. That actually sounds like, and people that had them, you'd hit go to disc 3, it was like.
I had a 1984 Gold Mercury Cougar as my first car. And in order to sweeten the pot, my dad put a stereo system in it.
Nice. So we had similar.
This is funny. I mean, I'll just say.
I think my Sentra's probably better than your Cougar.
This is the episode of random tangents. But the funny thing about that one is that I got that car for Christmas when I turned 16, and this is how it went down. I opened a Christmas present and it had keys in it, and I was like, "What's this?" And my dad was like, "Let's go to the garage and look." And I go in there and I open the door of the garage, and it looks like a pimp mobile. Okay. It's a gold Mercury Cougar, and it looks like it's from the 70s. It's like in 1984. And this is 95, I guess. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and is like, "We put in some money, and your grandparents put in some money, and you owe them the rest."
No, you had to pay for it.
Yes, I did. So I had to make payments that I showed them because I flipped it upside down and totaled it 3 weeks later.
Oh gosh!
That I had to pay my grandparents for a car that I did.
You didn't have. Nice.
But the sound system was good.
Yeah, well, as was mine.
Yeah, it's
so the deal I made with myself was, so now I have this stereo system, which I purchased at a Circuit City, which no longer exists,
Yeah.
The deal I made with myself was when I traveled, I get to buy 2 or 3 discs, right? So it's like if I want to drive home for the weekend to see mom and dad, or I'm like, well, then I'll give myself the right to buy some discs, and you go take enough road trips, and if you get to buy yourself 2 or 3 discs every time, it piles up. And eventually I had a ton of discs, and I was working at Applebee's at the time, sort of the middle of my college career. And I had staked out this space at Applebee's as being like the Christian guy, you know, and so they would, a lot of the workers they would maybe want to party and do stuff afterwards. And I was, kind of like, well, I don't do that kind of stuff, guys. Sorry, I can't, or sometimes I'd go hang out with them, but I wouldn't participate in some of what they were doing. So I sort of staked out that space, and some of them couldn't stand me because of it. And some of them liked me, respected me. It was kind of a mixed bag, but that's who I was at my job. And I worked there for a couple of years. And, one night this guy asked me for a ride home. He's like, can I get a ride? And I said, sure. And so he jumps in the car with me, and I was proud of my loud stereo system. And so he gets in, and I hand him this giant thing of all these discs, and I'm like, pick something to listen to. Poof. And I hand it to him, and he starts flipping, and frankly, I own music that I just shouldn't have had. If I'm going to be a Christian guy, I probably shouldn't have had that. And he starts flipping discs, and he's like, I didn't think you would have this. Huh, you have and so he's like not a believer, and he's like shocked, he doesn't, or whatever. And I take him home, and then that starts this process in which I feel guilty. I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't have some of these things, but maybe I should, but I don't know. And I felt like at a conscience level, sort of a, spirit of God level, that I probably should go through and purge and throw away like whatever the bad stuff, whatever that means. And I was like, well, can I at least pawn them? Can I like sell them? Because they're worth a lot of money. But then I was like, well, that's not, can't do that, because that's like, if it's bad, it's like, you can't sell drugs, you can't intentionally give away bad things. I was like, but I pay a lot of money for this stuff. Oh my gosh, start adding up, like, I'm waiting tables, making not that much money, and you're thinking it's hundreds of dollars, and also just enjoyed the music, frankly, even if it was bad. And so at some point, this is like a month or 2 process, where I'm like feeling guilty and feeling bad about it, and I'm still keeping it, but I don't enjoy it anymore, and all this stuff. And so finally, and this is bad for the environment, so I apologize to my ecologically concerned friends. Finally, one day, I was just like, fine, God, I give up. And I pulled my car over off the side of the road near some woods, and just started chunking CDs off into the
that's more fun though.
Off into the forest, So
they're still there.
They probably still are. They don't degrade. So, but the point for me was, I knew what God wanted me to do. And so in that moment, I can sit there with a plateaued relationship with God, or I can do what he says and move forward. And that's really what your choice is. And that's exactly where Peter was. The other issue that I think comes to bear on this text is that we seldom, if ever really, as Christian culture, American people, get to read the Bible without already knowing the ending, right? Like, we already know what's going to happen. We know who Peter's going to become. We know he's going to say yes because we know where he's going, right? But that wasn't the case in the moment. I sometimes do Bible studies for Muslim background believers. So people have come to faith from a Muslim background, and they don't know the stories. And so I get to do things like, a few months back, I was doing a Bible study about the prodigal son with, again, Muslim background guys. I had never read that story before. Yeah. So we get to the point where the son comes back, and I was like, so what do you think happened? And they're all like, his dad beat him, or he threw him out. He let him come home, but he had to pay back the money. And they're all giving like their conjectures. And I'm like, he ran out and hugged him, and like, oh, they're like, no way, really? So I mean, it's great that we know the Bible inside and out, but it's, in a way, it loses some of its impact. Yeah. We're accustomed to the Bible and the gospel and these things, and we don't get to read it fresh. If you think of this through fresh eyes, And you think of the tension in this moment, because what's happening with Peter right here is he's standing at a crossroads and he doesn't know it. Mm-hmm. Because if he looks at Jesus and says, hey, I'm tired, I'm going home and going to bed, sorry, he had every right to do that. Jesus would not have stopped him, and his life never would have changed. He would have sat in his status quo, maybe forever, and we wouldn't know who he was. He would be lost in history. Now, what we know is that we know who Peter became, right? We know he got to walk on water with Jesus. We know that Peter became so spiritually powerful that his shadow passing over people healed them. We know that he would step out on the day of Pentecost and preach boldly, and thousands of people would come to faith. And then a few days later, do the whole thing again, and thousands more would come to faith. And that he would stand before, the Sanhedrin, the same people that killed Jesus, and just go at him, and we know that he would eventually, sail to Rome and become the pastor of the church in Rome, a group of people at this point in his life he hates their guts. He's a total racist and hates Romans. Eventually he's going to go pastor them, and right now today in the city of Rome, the largest church in the world stands as a marker over his grave. Right, this huge thing that's like 150 meters by 75 meters. And, St. Peter's Basilica. Yeah, is
Been
where
there,
he
filmed that.
Yeah, good job. It's a lovely building. It really is.
It really is.
So, but so we know who he became. He became this hero.
Yeah.
But on this day, on this boat, he's not a hero yet. He's just a grumpy, blue-collar working fisherman who's tired and wants to go home. And he has an option, which is to do what the Lord has asked me to or not. The same way we have the same options. Now, thankfully, he says, and if you read the text, I'll read it right now, clearly he doesn't want to do this. He says, Master, we've worked hard all night long and caught nothing. So he's like, come on, man. But then he says, but if you say so, it's almost just like, can you do something different? I'll let down the nets. So they do it. Jesus says, yeah, I said so. And so they row out a little bit, drop the nets. And here's what happens. It says, when they did this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets began to tear. So they signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them. They came, and they filled both boats so full they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, because I am a sinful man, Lord. For he and all those with him were amazed at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, Zebedee's sons, who were Simon's partners. Don't be afraid, Jesus told Simon. From now on, you'll be catching people. And then they brought the boats to land, left everything, and followed him. And so for me, the takeaway on this story is, so you have all these masses in Capernaum who never accept Jesus as a personal Lord. But Peter, in that moment when that miracle takes place, first off, he stands at that crossroad and he chooses to obey, which I think is crucial. Like, I think, if there's one takeaway for us, it is that spiritually we have the same thing. Mm-hmm. If you want to see the power of God unleashed in your life, and you want to see miracles, and you want to see your life changed, and if your status quo is not good for you, and for most people it's not. If there's something, I would say obedience to God is probably the starting place. If you want to open up door number 2 where there's miracles in your destiny as opposed to just your status quo, then I think obedience is where you start. Mm-hmm. Without obedience, you're just going to sit right where you are for as long as you want to. So I think that's crucial. But then what you see is he obeys, and that miracle takes place, and then you have that moment where where it says he fell on his knees at Jesus' feet, and he's like, he says, get away from me. Later on we're going to talk about the Beatitudes, and the first two Beatitudes say that you have to become poor in spirit, and you have to mourn. And what that means is that you come to realize, like, I have nothing to offer, and I'm really upset and sad about my sins and who I am. And I think what you see, and once you get to that posture of realizing I have nothing to offer the Lord in exchange, and I'm truly regretful and mournful about the things I've done in my life, the damage I've caused, the people I've hurt. That moment is when the Lord can be activated to start changing you. Mm-hmm. And I think we see all this encapsulated in Peter right here in this moment. We see that obedience, we see that posture. And that's when Jesus says, don't be afraid, come be a fisher of men. Jesus is like, now I can use you. Now we can go do something. And so for me, you just get that contrast. You get the masses who never really accept the Lord and never get to that point that Peter gets right there. But then you've got Peter who does, and Jesus says, all right, now let's go.
Yeah.
And so then the challenge to us is, well, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the masses, hang around in Christian culture, live in the Bible Belt South, enjoy being in proximity to Jesus, but not really accepting his lordship? Or do you want to obey when it's hard and give him a chance to do what he does? Yeah. And so, I know the choice I'd like to make.
Yeah. No, that's all. And that brings two things to my mind. One is poor in spirit is kind of the opposite of that, would be pride, kind of based on what we're talking about. So, which, pride is, I guess, the root of sin, you could say. And to see that contrast is really kind of interesting.
You can't do anything with pride.
Right.
Because, pride doesn't think it needs to be forgiven, and pride doesn't think it needs to learn. Whatever point you get prideful, you're going to plateau spiritually and also just personally.
Yeah.
So, if you as a business operator, or I as a, sort of missionary / minister, if I want to grow and get better, like pride, you can't make any space for it. Because once you're prideful, then why did I learn from somebody else? Why did I look at somebody else? Why am I looking at myself? Why you see, I'm saying, like pride kills everything.
Yeah.
It has there's no space for it.
Yeah.
In a healthy person, it's just not. Yeah.
And I think that, being poor in spirit isn't necessarily a destination. It's kind of it recycles. It's like it's hard to constantly be like, I'm like always so teachable.
Yeah.
It's like being like, no, I'm like the most humble person. Like you just,
it's hard to rest there, right?
Really just humility. I'm just,
at some point I guess you've gotten to a certain point with your relationship with Christ and you think like, I'm doing great.
Well,
and you do have a little backdoor pride, right? And you're not, like, look at the stuff I'm doing.
It definitely is like something to revisit though, to like, challenge yourself and think through like what, our motivations aren't always so obvious to us. Most of the time they aren't. And it takes sometimes moments like this to be like, give you something to respond to, or to like challenge your direction that you're driving in. Like, oh yeah, maybe I should, why am I acting that way? Oh, because of this. Oh, then it kind of gives you that reset to be like more teachable and chilled out a little bit. And the other thing is like I thought about is like this feels, knowing what we know about Peter later, seems like a very Peter thing to do, to be like fall down and go all in, right? He's hot, right?
He's yes. Whether it's the right direction or the wrong direction, he's going somewhere.
Yeah.
Full bore.
So the fact that he just like goes all in, it's totally
no, it's definitely sense. That's him. And sometimes it's led of God and it's good, and sometimes he gets into himself and it's bad. And maybe we'll do a whole series on the life of Peter. That'd be cool.
Let's do that. That'll be cool. Awesome. Well, that is it for this episode. And as always, to check out more of our content, go to thelandandthebible.com.